Where is the re-referral bill? I don't have it in my folder. I mean, where is Duncan Brown's bill? I don't have it in here.
It is the second on the left.
76.
Yes.
Okay, this is the Joint Appropriations Committee meeting, March 18th at noon, recess. Chairman Perkins is off to present at another committee. I'm filling in as vice chair. Karen, please call the roll.
Yes, for March 19th at noon. Senator Guru.
March 19th.
Senator Hicks. Senator Steinmetz. Senator Kinski.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The first matter up is one that was postponed from last night, uniform statewide payment processing, and it's our pleasure to welcome to the Senate Appropriations Committee Representative Duncan Brown. Representative Brown, the bill is yours and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I bring you guys House Bill 76, and I'll just lay out exactly what the bill does instead of going line by line through the bill first. And then if you guys would like me to go through the bill, I can. About 2 years ago, we passed a bill, and this is a follow-up bill to this. So 2 years ago, we passed a bill that said, hey, look, Game and Fish and the Real Estate Commission and DEQ they've all got these different payment processing credit card contracts. We want these to all be centered underneath one contract. We can save the state millions and millions of dollars. At the time, it was about an $8 million savings estimated. Well, what we have since found out from that is even in through the process and the potential implementation of that, we still have some agencies that are doing things differently than others. And that's what this bill is attempting to fix. So what I will say, first and foremost, Mr. Vice Chair, is we seriously need to have the original bill that I have implemented. It's been 2 years that it's been passed and it's still not taken care of at ETS. And I have been in direct contact with the director of ETS, trying to hurry that through. And so what we have is an amendment that was passed in the engrossed copy to really kind of push that forward as well. And I'll go over that as well. What we have with this particular bill is a follow through with just making sure that the agencies of the state are doing things the same uniform way. We don't want people walking into Game and Fish and being told one thing about credit card processing fees and walking over to the Department of Health and using their credit card a different thing. So what we're doing with this bill is creating a situation where the credit card payment fees that are assessed will be borne by the user of the credit card. The state cannot accept the fees. And what has been happening is some of these agencies have been absorbing this into their general funds. Others have been charging the end user. So this bill attempts to clarify that and just say, at this point, if you use a credit card with a state agency, any state agency, you will be borne the cost of whatever that cost is once the uniform contract is set up. And once that contract is set up, the end user will be charged that. And there must be clearly and conspicuously marked so everybody knows it. It's not a surprise any longer. That was another complaint that I had heard from a few constituents, especially with some of the larger agencies that use credit cards, specifically Game and Fish, and especially even Game and Fish within some other areas too. So it wasn't just Game and Fish. They're just one of the larger people that, people use their credit cards to pay for fees. So, Mr. Chairman, the engrossed copy has two amendments that were made in the House Appropriations hearing of this bill. And I think we're both made in good versions. So what we did is if you go to page 3 and line 20, on the engrossed version, no, I take that back. It may not be on the engrossed, but okay, so line 20, yeah, it still does stay on line 20. We added the term debit or credit card. And the reason we added that is after some concern was brought to me by a few of the boards and commissions that charge their annual fees, that they're required by law to have their annual fees wrapped into their registrations or their permits or whatever they charge. And so there was concern that if they charge a credit card or a debit card fee, that's okay, but all these other banking fees that may be associated with doing business within their agency would be double dipping. So we added that credit and debit card saying that we recognize they can't wrap that in there because they don't know how much that's going to be. So now that's a clear delineation. And then, Mr. Chairman, on page 4 at the end of this, we added a section 2 that basically just asks for a report. And that report is due May 31st, 2022. And that really goes back to my earlier statement of requiring ETS to get this process up and going. It's high time we start getting the savings.
To me again where that one is.
That's going to be on page 4 after line 13. Well, and actually after this, it's going to be on page, it would have been after line 13. We added section 2. So it's the
Section 2,
It's
okay.
the line 15 now. Yeah.
Report back, let us know how you're doing.
Yep.
Okay.
And what this report does is actually requires us to look at whether or not this actually truly benefited us. And if it didn't, what I will say is after being in the executive branch for a number of years, I recognize that some of the consolidation efforts didn't always yield the expectations that were put forth. This allows us to take a look at that and find out if it did. And if it doesn't, let's repeal this bill and the one before this and go back to the way we were doing business. But I certainly don't think we'll see that. I think we were doing business wrong. I think we had way too many contracts and way too many people doing the exact same thing. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what this bill does. If you'd like me to go line by line through the bill, I'd be more than happy to do that for you.
But I'll defer to the committee's judgment. Okay, thank you. I don't think we need to go through it line by line. But committee questions, comments?
Just a comment. I just thank you, Representative. I know you've been working on this for a while. We've talked about it a lot there. You know, any business knows that, you know, the more credit cards you take, especially for small purchases, little things and big, the more dollars you have and the more transactions you have, the better rates you get. And so, you know, even if the state passes on a flat rate where they have a little charge in there for handling fees for themselves or whatever, still, you know, it's much better if the state does it the same way. And I know that's what the good representative is getting at and wholeheartedly endorses the attempt because it does. It makes us look bad not to do it the same way, and it's easily remedied. And let us know if you're having any trouble with the ETS because we work with them.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
the other thing I'll say to that is it's a crying shame that I have to write a piece of legislation to do this.
Yeah. Anything else, committee members? Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, Landon, you and Representative Brown, you brought up earlier about, you know, some of the disparities, and you'd specifically mentioned Game and Fish and the big agencies. Just why were they exempt? You know, we're striking them out of the original bill and it stays in there. Why was WIDOT and Game and Fish now left out from this statewide uniform process?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, we actually don't strike them out from doing this. The original language was previous statute that said that Game and Fish and them and these other agencies have this capability. The new language in there says it's a statewide process no matter what. The one thing that we did do in the previous bill is we allowed that if they can show good cause that this doesn't fit the model and they have a better rate than what the state's authorizing, we can do it that way. The House Appropriations Committee even felt like taking that out from the original bill language, saying, no, you don't get to pick and choose when you can and can't do this. We're all part of the state of Wyoming.
You're rolling them in now.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, on that, I will give credit where credit is due. The Game and Fish Department was the only one that was coming forth to testify on this, and they've been doing this the right way in my books. They're what I modeled this after. They have had absolutely no issues. So I would like to commend them publicly for what they've been doing. It's some of the other boards and commissions and some of the other larger state agencies that have been taking this and deducting this out of their general fund and eating those fees to play the good guy ultimately.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
just to follow up, because I hear this and you're right, they do that. Well, what's the response that I tell my constituents? Because you used to be able to send in a check or something, and now they're automatically assessed a credit card fee, uniformly, same percentage on any transaction. They don't have any alternatives. They have to use a credit card balance. And sometimes those fees aren't necessarily disclosed until you put your credit card and then you push send, and then it shows up and says, well, I thought I was buying a $50 license and now I've got a credit card service fee on that. So it's almost like we force people to pay more than because they have to use a credit card. Have you run into that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I haven't, and I guess I would question back, this is a legitimate question. I wasn't aware that they're required to use credit cards. I know, again, we'll use DEQ as an example. When somebody pays for a permit, there's a lot of times that they're cut a check. So there wasn't a requirement to my knowledge of that. This requirement that we're talking about here was just if they use a credit card, we're going to keep it underneath there. That being said, to answer your question directly, I think it's inherent on us as a state. If you guys would like to change this and say that the user is not borne the fee and we want this to come out of the state general fund, I'm okay with that. What I want is uniformity. We shouldn't have certain agencies doing things one way and then walk across the street and have something else happening the exact opposite.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with that. It's just when you force them to have to use it and then pay the additional fee above and beyond that, sometimes people get a little excited about that. But anyway, not to belabor. Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I had a couple questions, just real quickly, if I could. What is the range? You know, when I first started in business as a new business, I just got gouged for just under 4%, and it took me a long time to fight it down to just over 2%. What is the range that we're seeing from these various contracts that are in place, and what do you think realistically we might get to?
So, Mr. Chairman, 2 years ago, if my memory serves me correct, I did this research. I have not done it again on this particular bill because it was a little outside of the scope, but we were sitting at 6% for some smaller boards and commissions. And then they were charging a per transaction fee. So it wasn't even just a 6% off the top. It was $1 or $2 to run the credit card, all the way down to, I believe it was in the range of 2.75.
Which is still too much.
I agreed. And so the original bill was expected to yield a substantial savings to the state, just wrapping everything underneath one credit card contract.
And then if you know, is it possible that we could just join with other states? I mean, surely we're not the first to do this. You would think a consortium of states might get it well below the 2.7% threshold.
You know, Mr. Chairman, I haven't thought about looking at other states, but I will tell you, this is a long road for me, and I plan on bringing additional work into this to work this through for cities and counties as well to join into this contract. Because right now we have, 100 municipalities and 23 counties doing this, and they're all negotiating their own contracts. So it would be my hopes that within the next year, we'd be able to open this up to those localities as well.
And do you think it's conceivable if you get the fee beat down low enough that we might look someday at getting rid of dinging them on the fee? Because, and I'll tell you, at least at the city, by the time you look at handling cash, handling checks, bad debt, theft, having to prepare a bank deposit, you accelerate the cash flow with a credit card. We just took credit cards and we ate the fee. And I just wonder in the long run if it's not cheaper to just eat the fee. There's got to be a break even in there somewhere.
Mr. Chairman, I agree completely. And that discussion was had. And what I will tell you is it's my sincere hope that ETS gets this contract. I believe that the last time I heard was about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. They had just finished up the RFP when we're getting ready to put it out for bid. I think it's going to depend upon exactly what you just said, what the rates are, what we're ultimately charged, and what that is. I agree. There's a considerable amount of potential issues when you're handling checks, cash, everything else like that. So I would venture to guess yes, and I would like to see us move in that direction eventually. As it stands right now, again, I don't care which way we go. If the committee chooses to go the other way, let's do it.
Anything else, Senator?
You're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. I switched banks because of it. My bank started charging me a point for giving them cash. It's a big bank that has horses and a carriage.
Right.
Yeah, they charge you a point. They charge you a point for depositing cash just for the fee of doing it. But and it's like, isn't it like the coin of the realm? I mean, not to belabor the point, but it's like it is the official tender of the United States. You would think they would take it without fee, but they do. And it's just for that reason. But I can't imagine that we couldn't get that down to a 3% fee statewide. And that would cover not only the cost of the credit card, but the cost of actually, the paperwork of taking care of that. and get down there, get it
Well,
down
the-
that
the
far. And then
real-
it might be to a point, although I don't think an auditor would ever, a government auditor would ever let you just eat it unless there was some sort of law, some sort of statute passed by us to allow it to happen. But that'd be the day for sure.
Yeah.
Because I know our constituents would.
Well, it's so expensive because it's a duopoly. You don't have a whole lot of options. And, you know, in theory, like when I first started, what they told me, Duncan, is they said, well, you know, the credit card company got burned. Somebody went into the air conditioner business, sold a bunch of air conditioners, and they were all defective, and they charged back on the credit card. It's like, what? They're going to charge their fishing license back? You know, there's little risk to these credit card companies. All right. Well, thanks for all your work on it.
Yep.
We really appreciate it. We promise not to say it's a simple bill when it goes out on the floor, though. That's not.
No, I'm not. It's a good
Yeah, it's
little
a simple
bill.
little bill.
It's a little- I'll be-
All right.
Good little complicated bill.
Yeah. Yep. Karen, do we have anybody in the waiting room for public comment? All right, public comment is closed. It's been moved and seconded. Committee discussion or amendments? Hearing none. Karen, call the roll.
Thank you. Excuse me, on House Bill 76, Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Aye.
Senator Perkins,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Kinski,
Aye.
5 ayes.
All right, and so we'll report that back out to the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Senator Steinmetz agreed to take this on. And I also have Senator Driscoll.
Yeah, Baldwin, Landon, you've got sort of the 5 horsemen of the
Yeah.
apocalypse signed on.
Veritable murderer's row.
Thanks, Representative. Have a good lunch hour. Do you want to take it, Drew, or you want me to just finish out this bill while you're working on that?
I'll just, whatever you want to do,
We've got this provider recruitment grant program. Do you want to kick that out ahead of 121?
that's a House bill. This is the last
Oh,
one.
okay, that's right. Okay, never mind.
If-
All right,
if you
I'm going to
want
turn it
do
over to you, Senator Perkins, on Senate File 121, which previously died for want of a second and is being retooled for prime time.
Hopefully. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just asked us if we look, did you get a new flow chart? Yep, that's a new one. And then you should have, right, and so you should have those, a couple things there, and then you should have a new substitute X. A new substitute X. And so, Mr. Chairman, went in and my discussions with Don Richards and Dave Gruber were to come back in and do a couple things. It was to take the parts of this bill and just, first of all and foremost, if you look to the bottom of the spreadsheet, now it just goes where it always went. So in both places, so the front side of this sheet, one side is the permanent mineral trust fund, the back side of the common school permanent land fund. And so in both of those, it just takes and first of all, it goes over the money goes where it's supposed to go and where it goes under current statute. Then the other thing that the bill does that I didn't communicate with Dawn is it doesn't do anything with the caps. It leaves the caps exactly where they are. So when you see down there excess over 225, that's no longer in the bill. And we'll verify that, but that was my instructions that the permanent reserve accounts stay right where they are, which I think is at 150 right now. So it doesn't do anything with that. And so it doesn't, since it's all still going to Sipa, because it goes back where it was, there's just reminded that 45% of the Sipa to the major maintenance fund account, that still comes out. That's current law now too, for major maintenance for help with schools. And then there's the 10 million to the penitentiary capital construction account and 65% of the remaining balance is Sipa legislative deficit control account. So, we might look at some amendments there, but we started off, the starting point was just put it back where it was so that we don't get bogged down in some of these reform ideas that we're trying to do. And so I'd point that to your attention. Then the other thing I'd point out is next thing I'd do is I'd refer you to this chart here. If you've got that one. And so what this is, just going back to look, if you look at this and starting at the far right, out of the spillover since 2004 have put about just under $600 million from spillovers. If you go to the, yeah, the tips, the spillover, the tip, and then the other side of that is just with increases in values, and this, I didn't see it, we're missing this piece, but ultimately there's about $1.8 billion that's happened from diversions, you know, the putting the money in between the 1%, constitutional 1% and the 1% savings, the 1% severance tax account, that the total amount in there has been about, like I said, my recollection is about right about 1.8, $1.9 billion. So it's really almost a 30, you know, about 10% or so of the value of the corpus has come from spillover, and about between 35 and 40% has come from some savings deposits. And so I just bring that up in the recognizing that you have to, you know, you got to be careful how you do this, because again, we're trying to balance the future with the present. But that was, you know, it's just, I think, important information to know, keep in mind that it's the savings and the direct deposits that we make to those corpus, that's where the majority of the growth of those corpuses come from, that, and then the appreciation of the corpus from market values. So then this last chart, what I'm trying to do is show you the current spending policies are set by taking 5%, or, and you know, we step that down of the value of the permanent funds as of the end of the previous calendar year. And so you're taking that percentage there. This is showing for the permanent trust fund and the common school permanent land fund, the effect of what this bill does, which changes it so the spending policy is 5% of the 5-year average of the market value. So you take the average of the last 5 years and it's 5% of that number. This shows you what the effective yield is, or what the effective rate of the spending policy is when you round it off and take the last 5 years into consideration. So the net effect is that it would be the same as if this in 2021 it would be the same if the spending policy is 4.86%. In 2020, the spending policy would have been equivalent to a 4.74% and so on. And you see that for both of them there. So the point of that is by moving to a 5-year rolling average, we effectively reduce somewhere, the spending policy rate is going to drop somewhere between 0.5% to 1/3%. So it steps down. So your effective rate is with this, we actually get a step down on what the effective rate of the spending policy.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm trying to remember, does it start on the current statute? I believe it's 2022. We start goes to 4.75%, and then in 2023 it goes to 4.5%, and then it stays at that level.
Right, but that's based upon Mr. Chairman?
Current.
Please.
That's right. It's based on the current. So the 5-year rolling average would knock another if you went to the 5-year, that would knock another 0.5 to 0.75% off of what the effective rate is in any event. So with this bill, we get a significant step down on the effective rate with this bill that has been put off for a number of years.
And
Mr. Chairman, say that, go back, Drew, and say that one more time, what you just said. We get an effective.
Yeah, so for example, if the spending policy for 2021, which is estimated because we don't know what the balance would be at the end of the year, the effective spending policy for 2021, if this bill were to have passed or been in effect, would have been 4.86%. In 2020, it would have been 4.74%. So you've got in those 2 years, you have a step down of approximately 0.25%, a little bit less. And that will vary depending on good years and bad years as they get rolled into the average, because you're going against a 5-year average instead of the current value of the fund as a close of the previous year. So by taking the averages, you're averaging down the fair market value against what spending policy is being assessed.
And that's just a function of the fact that we've been in a rising market for 5 years.
That's good. Well, we've had some years where we've been in the market value goes up for 2 reasons. Sometimes it's capital, appreciation and sometimes it's savings. But keep in mind that even when we don't do, particularly in the PMTF, that even when we don't do the 1%, there's still a constitutional, is it 1.5 or 1.25% of severance taxes that are automatically deposited into the PMTF. So,
But my point is that the effective yield is just purely a function of the corpus in year one is smaller than the corpus in year five, but you take year five effective percentage as a market value of in year five. So you're distributing out based on a 5-year rolling average, but dividing it over the current market value to come up with this effective yield. But if still you're up in the spending policy to 5% as net of it. Go ahead, Senator Guru.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to ask, so instead of using an arbitrary number, we're going to use the 5-year rolling average, which good or bad would seem to be at least a smarter play from a financial fiduciary standpoint, wouldn't it be? Instead of just picking a number. So we're going to, I mean, I know what we've done, step down.
But we're using the 5-year rolling average now.
no, we're not. No, we don't.
Our spending policy is just the current years.
It's 5% of the current year.
And then
Value.
steps down in
But of the, I thought current policy had a 5-year something. And is it the 5-year? Go ahead, Polly. Come up to the mic. Please identify yourself so we can keep the record clear.
Hi, Polly Scott, LSO, Budget Fiscal. I did want to just clarify on that point. Currently, we are using the 5-year rolling.
We are using the 5-year rolling.
Yes, but your point is exactly correct, Mr. Chairman, that the average of what you end up taking is lower than the 5%.
Mhm.
And Polly, if I may, if the market went down, then we would effectively, you could do a chart here that showed we're taking more than 5% of the current market value out.
Mr. Chairman, theoretically, this is actual in front of you here on this chart.
So currently our our spending policy is 5% of the 5-year market value average. And that's slated to step down on the PMTF. That's slated to step down to 4.75 in fiscal year 23 and to 4.5 in fiscal year 24.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to provide that clarification.
Thank you.
I think as long as you're at that table, you don't have to have that mask on unless
Okay.
you'll get in trouble with Matt Obrecht. I don't want you to get in trouble. So we interrupted your narrative with questions. So please continue.
Okay. And so as you do that, but the point is as you look at that, it's not a 5-year. You're already stepping it down because we're using the 5-year rolling average. So when we talk about 5% and you look at what they're talking about, when RVK comes in and talks about it, when they talk about a 4 or 4.5% rate, that's usually looking at this as the, that's usually looking at the most recent value of that 5%. And so ultimately, the point is when you use the 5%, you're already having an effective rate that's significantly less than 5%. Now, as you do this, the other part of this bill is that it starts to direct the funds. In this version, we're directing those funds into the corpus. So of the 1% severance tax, we're putting that money into the corpus instead of the reserve accounts, at least initially. And so that's what we're trying to do is my point, and particularly now, is if we've got to quit anticipating capital gains to bail us out. And so if you can get to these spending policies, whether they're 5% or 4.5%, whatever it is, but you can get to that, then you know what you have. And you don't have people, we can quit rating the 1%. We can quit hopping around looking to grab capital gains and spend it because the capital gains will come into these things. And if we can rely on the spending policies out of these accounts and develop the discipline to just leave it alone, leave everything else alone, then we've gone a long way to put our revenue streams, into a it reduces the volatility that we have based upon the stock market.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my questions are on page 10 and 11. And so I see that we are putting it into the permanent fund to begin with. but then on page 11, we're putting it into the reserve accounts
Because I think that's what I,
in
Polly,
2023.
I'm sorry.
Just stay up there, Polly, please.
Yes,
We're going to use you.
And if you wouldn't mind staying, because I'd also like to go over the repealers again, because the bill I had that written on if those repealers are the same and what we're repealing as well. But so it looks to me, I just am confused by page 11, I guess, if you could explain that.
And Polly, I think, isn't this what current law does?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the new version of the bill, and perhaps Karen could contact Dave Groover, the drafter. It was my understanding he was going to.
I thought both Don and Dave were going to be here.
They may have been delayed, but I'm not quite sure what Senator Steinmetz is referring to on page 11, because I have a different draft of the bill. I have the original.
Well, Senator Perkins, just let's go to your chart on the PMTF.
Mhm.
Okay, so it shows 2/3 of the 1% severance tax, or didn't you used to call that the statutory diversion?
Well, it's the 1% statutory severance tax.
Okay,
Yes.
that goes to the corpus, you said initially at least, and it shows fiscal year 21 and 22, it goes to the corpus. Thereafter, it goes into the reserve account.
Mhm.
And so, and then similarly on the 1/3 of it for the schools, it's just going into the corpus for 21 and 22. And share with me the rationale for not putting it permanently into the corpus as opposed to putting it into the reserve account.
And the reason is twofold. One is that if you can't save money this year and next year with the America Recovers Act or whatever it's called, you're never going to save money. But the other side of that is in the reserve accounts. If you divert this and put it in the reserve accounts and you have capital gains in that year, you'll get a significant rollover out of those reserve accounts. And so if you put so you've got, and you see there, you look at the available balances. If you put it in there, and like I say, you have if they get $200 or $300 million of capital gains in a year, plus what you put in here, there, you get really quickly, we can get it to stay at 150, you'll start rolling money over into the reserve account. The other side of it is simply that you know that you continue to have a deficit in the particularly in the Common School Permanent Land Fund. Even you're going to continue to have a deficit and a shortage in the school foundation program. Even with the cuts you make, we all know what that looks like in a few years. So you're going to be covering the cost of education. Maybe it's not $1 billion, but you're still going to be covering a significant cost of education that's not there yet.
So, and I lose track of the ebb and flow, and I haven't been here that long, but am I right that we've seen in the past where in budget bills that flows into the reserve accounts have been intercepted, or the tips into the PMTF corpus have been intercepted?
No, of course you have.
Okay.
We've all done that. I mean, the legislature, you can't bind, it's the law until it's not.
Okay, so the question, so the success of this then depends on the legislature at both houses having the fiscal discipline not to reach out and intercept.
That's true, Mr. Chairman, but it also puts on the table a spending policy that is truly a spending policy. It starts to move this towards more of an endowment model. And so you know what that is. We can always have the debate about what those spending policies ought to be, whether they ought to be 5% or 4.5% or 4.25%. But at the end, if we can get this into a model where we can at least set ourselves up for success, it's a great step forward. And and this also, it deals with not doing, if we can also get the discipline to quit doing the stuff in the budget bill and do it in bills like this is where it needs to happen.
Anything else? So just kind of give us the top line and maybe, let me check my understanding. I'm going to go to your chart. So that you're going to repeal the spending policy step down from 4.75 and 4.5, maintain it at 5.0, keep the reserve amount at 150%. And so the main thing this does then is dedicates the 1% severance tax account to either the PMTF reserve or the PMTF corpus, 2/3 of it. And I think likewise for the Common School Public Land Fund, you restore the spending policy amount to a constant 5% and then divert 1/3 of the severance tax initially to the corpus and thereafter to the Common School Public Land Fund reserve account.
That's correct. And in the past, most of that 1%'s always gone to the PMTF, but what you find is you go back about 1/3 of the severance taxes are actually off school lands. And we've been putting that money in the general or in the PMTF, which goes to the general fund for years. And, in just as a matter of where that money comes from, the revenue comes from, we add up and putting probably the approximate percentage that comes from state lands and the school trust lands into the Common School Permanent Land Fund.
Committee members, I don't want to hog the floor. If you guys have questions, jump in there. But Sherry.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. When we could, I would still like to go over the repealers again if we could, so we knew what those were. I apologize. I had it written down in my other bill and I've lost it somewhere in my pile on my desk, so.
Okay, and so let's do that right just in a moment. One more question. And so tell me why moving back to a 5% is a necessary incident of this bill. You were on CapFin, I've been on CapFin, and we heard that the past is not prologue in terms of our expectations for earnings. And we stepped it down to 4.7 and 4.5 for a reason. And we've postponed that once or twice. Why do we want to go back to the 5%? Tell me why that's a good idea.
Two reasons. One is we've never used the spending policy as a spending policy. The spending policy is basically that currently operates no more than a cap that helps you calculate a value when the stuff tips. We've never had the spending policy. This helps us move towards an endowment model that hopefully that I believe will be more sustainable. And the 5%, as you said, the 5%, the effective rate under an endowment model of a 5% is really what we have is what you see here. It is a step down to about a 4.75%, which is closer to the sustainable amounts that RBK has been talking about than the 5% that we have. I think the other thing is that when we talked about RBK and particularly under the treasurers are always talking about intergenerational equity. And quite frankly, it's almost impossible to inflation proof under the model that RBK continues to talk about. But what we do know is if we can, the money that we save into those accounts, whether we roll it over or however we get it into the corpus, that is how we build for the future. And if we can develop the discipline to let this model work and also have the appropriate spending policies that we know are spending policies, and if there's money in the reserve accounts to sustain the spending policies, then it's profiled and then everybody knows about it. It's a giant step forward in transparency. And I think the third reason that you have out there escapes me, it went away, but anyway, that's my answer.
Okay, and then not to be too dense, but tell me why our spending policy in the past has not ever functioned as a spending policy, and why you said all it did was calculate the tips. But this time under this bill, it will truly function as a spending policy. And so help me understand what the difference is between what we used to do and what this bill is going to make us do.
What we used to do is you would find that you just flat out allocate in section 300 capital gains and put them here and put them there. Right. And so the item obviously this is let the capital gains go into contribute towards the 5%. Or, the 5% you're looking, if there's over, it spills over into the reserve account. If it doesn't, it goes to general fund. And everybody knows what that number is. And also, if you look in the budget bill, there's an attempt to raise the spending policy to 9%. I'd like rather have 5 than 9.
All right. Thank you. you want to have go through a walk through the bill? Do you want to do that, or do you want Dave to do that, or?
Dave, can you take us through,
Person.
I think,
I think we're still waiting on Senator Steinmetz's question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sherry, go ahead.
Dave, can you take us through the repealers on page 10?
On page what?
10, I think it is, of the substitute bill? Excuse me, yes, page 11, section 3.
Of substitute X.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, basically now the repealers are all, the first ones in 719, all of those provisions are just removing the step down, the 4.75 and 4.5, 2/3, 1/3 to the reserve accounts.
Did you want to walk through the balance of the bill, or is that enough?
So,
Well, I go with the pleasure of the committee, and we are running out of time, but
so if I think I can take it through really quick.
okay.
So on page 2, what you're talking about is we're defining earnings, trying to clean up the definition of we have interest, we have income, we have all these definitions out there. We're trying to clean up the definition of earnings. So, so when we talk about earnings, it's interest, dividends, and rents. That's mostly with reference to the Common School Permanent Land Fund. Under 2 is that of this subsection, other realized earnings shall be credited to as soon as practical after the end of the fiscal year, but no later than 90 days after the end of the fiscal year in which the earnings are realized. Mostly has to do with capital gains and when they're realized, so that they're part of earnings. And then 3 is any debit against the account for fund which exists as a result of investment losses. So we're netting capital gains against capital losses. It gives the ability for that to be marched off, just like we used to call it the Meyer rule.
Meyer
But now
rule.
it's the treasurer's I forget what they
Interpretive
call it.
policy.
The treasurer's, policy, whatever that, I can't remember the name of that right now. And then 4 is the credit earnings against earlier sum just allows them to go back if you do that, if you're setting off account, you're going to pay that back over a period of time in which the treasurer determines is appropriate. Most time that's been 2 to 3 years, depending on what the market's done. Also, so then if we go to what the rest of that is so for each fiscal year, if you go to 3, the annual spending policy fiscal year is the 5%, sets it at the 5%. And then you go down to spending policy for Common School Permanent Land Fund is 5%. Then you go down to the spending policy for higher education endowments is on page 4 on line 15, and down to the end of the page is 5%. The state fair endowment, we're just going back and you hit that. We're doing, we pulled out all the increasing these reserve accounts. We used to raise them all 225. Those are no longer in there. Again, let's see this one, the 25% of the investment range shall be distributed to the Wyoming State Fair account. The money is, so you go to 5 on the Wyoming Military Assistance Relief Fund. Again, you just requiring in accordance with it's because we're mostly cleaning up, I think, cleaning up some old language, but then also we're now referring back to this definition of earnings, if I remember right. Is that correct, Dave?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, the issue you have is constitutionally you have interest used, earnings used, income used, all different ones. Can't change the Constitution, obviously, with the law. These are for non-constitutional funds. And what we're trying to do is use uniform earnings for all of these, because that's how it's really being interpreted by the treasurer today. And so instead of saying interest, income, and earnings, we're just talking about earnings for the non-constitutional funds.
Okay.
And then the other things we're doing is trying to get a timing to be uniform. Quarterly distributions or monthly distributions, all trying to go back to what Senator Perkins talked about earlier in the bill.
So that's the same thing on pages 8, 9, game and fish.
Then you get to the severance tax distributions on 10. That's where you go to the red box on this. So that's the red box that you see on the charts. So the first one, you're dividing the severance taxes between the OPSTA, 1% optional, 1% severance tax, 2/3 to the PMTF, 1/3 to the Common School Permanent Land Fund. And then you have there where for at least this first year, it goes to Permanent Trust Fund. Then you have the diversions we talked about in section 3, repeal the last hangover we have from section 4 from last year, because it changed some of the stuff we did in the budget bill last year. We tried to find some compromise there. And section 5 has to do transfer the unobligated and unexpended. It requires those the 1% severance taxes to be deposited at the end of, I think it's the end of this year, if I remember right. On October 1st of 2021, it requires the deposit of those into the corpus for the year. Section 6 then is we look at going back and trying, I think section 6 is mostly looking at trying to make sure that what we're doing and look together about some changes that we may need to, that we probably need to the Constitution to make sure that what we do and how we do things even currently is fully constitutional. So that puts together that committee that orders the select committee on capital financing to go through and do a study and come back with suggestions on how we make sure that what we do complies with the Wyoming Constitution. I think, that's my quick run through. And Mr. Chairman and David, if you can correct me or add anything else, that would be great.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I'd just add two things. Senator's right about the study and the issue we've had for years, and I think it's still out there. Do capital gains belong to income? Do they belong to corpus? And I think it might be a different answer depending on the active admission, depending on the fund. And this directs the Capital Finance Committee figure that out and then make an allocation. And I think really what will happen is the legislature, as long as they look at it and make a reasonable allocation, the court would say you're fine. But that's really never been done. We've just done it ad hoc, really. And so this says, take a look at it. And the other thing I'd add is R.V. Kuntz had suggested, and the Treasurer's Office had suggested, going to a true endowment model where you could take 4%, 5%, whatever number you land on, from the corpus, the amount of the corpus, whether it's realized or unrealized gains. And they want to be able to do that so they don't have to sell. And so there's not pressure to sell to meet that. And this study would say, how do we get there? And Utah's done it. We looked at doing, I don't think you can do it without a constitutional amendment. I don't think you can take parts of the corpus as the Constitution stands. But anyway, this directs a study of that issue.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
One question here is we have similar things in the budget. Do we need a controlling statement in here that what if both of them pass? We get something different for the 1% distribution that's different in the budget, that's different in the bill. Which one's going to control it?
Mr. Chairman, you have a number of bills out there that conflict on these distributions. At some point, and what we do at LSO is we do we call a conflicts report. And when things get close to passing, we look at all of those and then we report to the chairman of the committees or who's ever considering bills to say, okay, now you have to make a decision. Which one of these are you going to want to control? And sometimes we do it by saying, okay, this bill supersedes anything else, or we take things out of other bills. And you have a lot of conflicts right now.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Is there any way we could get a list of where all these same things are going on in all these different bills? Because I would sure like to know that. Thank you.
There's at least two other ones in the school finance.
School finance and the budget and this one, maybe one more.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I'm sure Don has a list of the fiscal things that are in conflict. I don't know if they've run a list, but I can certainly ask Matt if they've run a list of the statutory provisions that are in conflict. And if we have those, certainly we can get those for you.
Dave, Senator Perkins said that historically we just allocated cap gains directly in a section 300. And is that because we don't have any statute directly as this bill does on page 2, subsection Romanet 2, that all other realized earnings, is that why we've been allocating cap gains into 300 rather than taking a total income approach? Is that a complicated enough question for you?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it's complicated, but I think it's different answers. And a lot of those answers, I think, depends on the fiscal conditions of the state at a given time. And remember, if you go back to the tranches, we said, well, we're going to make this, we're going to make this, but we never profile capital gains, but you pretty much know they're coming. a lot of times as you get through the year, but they're not profiled. So that's one of the reasons you've done it. I don't know that the absence of a statute has stopped you, because what you'll do is say, notwithstand that provision for the period of the budget, we're going to take these monies and do X, Y, and Z with those.
Like everything in excess of the 5% on the spending policy amount is, but below this amount is going to go over here. That kind of
Mr.
thing.
Chairman, sometimes it's been in conjunction with and in adherence to the spending policy amounts. Sometimes it has not been. And these spending policy amounts, I remember the first year we did this was probably 25 years ago. You started at 8 3/8%, because that's what the market was, and everybody thought that's what you could make. And then actually you started at a hard dollar amount. First percentage was 8 3/8, and you've come down. And so when you say it's 4, 4.5, well, if you talked about earlier, it really depends on the market. But the RVK position is, we think long-term, if you allow us to take just a percentage of the value, regardless of whether we've realized those gains or not, we can make whatever the number is. And I'm not going to throw out a number because I think it depends on the market. And that's part of what this, and the stable 5% is what they're, at least some folks are shooting at and think that that's realistic. Others will say lower.
And the spending policy amount, whether it's 5 or 4.5 or 4 3/4, this chart, the 5-year market value, that includes both realized and unrealized capital gains, doesn't it? And
Mr. Chairman, I haven't seen the chart.
So actually what that, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yeah.
what that is it's just the market value of the portfolio as of the end of the fiscal year. So it's just the market value that exists.
okay,
And so if there's been capital gains, so to the extent that they haven't been distributed, so it's no longer in corpus. But other than that, yes, it would include, if capital gains have been realized and they're still there, they haven't been distributed, then it would include both.
But what goes into the spending policy amount is all interest, income, dividends, as well as realized capital gains. You calculate all that to calculate whether you got to 5% or in excess of 5%, whether you tip or you don't tip, correct? Realized capital gains go into that.
Realized capital gains are included in the definition of earnings in this bill. Does that answer? I don't.
But
does that
at
answer
present,
your
in
question?
calculation of the SPA, aren't realized capital gains in there?
Mr. Chairman, the calculation is really just on the 5-year rolling average, and it's not really segregated in that way. And Craig does not profile capital gains until they are realized. But if I will refer you to your chart, which does show you that the investment earnings are comprised of interest, dividends, and realized capital gains once they are realized.
Where is that?
It's right here on this.
At the top?
Third box down.
Right here, right here.
Okay,
PNPF
gotcha. All right, that
investment
answers my
earnings.
questions. And then the original, the statutory diversion, the 1% severance tax originally, did that run directly into corpus before we began intercepting it?
Mr. Chairman, that's been all over the place, but I think when it was the 1% was first enacted, it was distributed to corpus.
Okay. Committee members, any other questions or comments? Public comment? Do we have anybody in the waiting room? Karen? Okay. Close public comment.
Second.
Been moved and second discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of proposed amendments.
Okay.
We go to
Mr. Vice President.
On
do
the
this.
substitute.
Okay.
On the substitute. Substitute X. So page 10, line 18.
So, Mr. Chairman, point of order. Do
Please.
you want to move it and adopt it, or do you want to move it and then you're going to amend the amendment? What's your pleasure? Just trying to,
I'm not running the show. He is.
okay.
Well, what did you intend to move? You moved the substitute bill?
Yeah, substitute bill's been moved and seconded.
Yeah, so we're going to amend the amended bill.
Okay.
Okay. Page 11 or page 10?
Page 10.
Page 10 of substitute X.
Mr. Chairman, First Amendment is on page 10, line 18, after 2022, insert and thereafter. Second part of that amendment is over on page 11.
So could you, is after, on what line was that on?
So
Page-
line 18, so
Okay.
we see for fiscal year 2022 and thereafter, this
thereafter.
fund shall be deposited.
Okay,
And then if you flip over to page 11, delete one, all the new language in 1 through line 8. The effect of that is it runs the 1%, 2/3 into the corpus of the Permanent Wyoming Mental Trust Fund, 1/3 into the permanent or the common school permanent land fund corpus. That's the effect of the amendment.
Second.
third.
Question.
All those in favor of discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of Senator Hicks's amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion carries. We're back on the amendment itself.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I have another amendment.
Okay.
I don't know where we're going to do this, but the amendment would be to go into this bill and incorporate the Sipa repeal that we passed out in the other bill. So on the flow chart, what it does is it will repeal the Sipa account. So Karen, I don't remember the name of that bill, but that would roll that into here. So the net effect is that is it would repeal the strategic investment projects account.
So how are we going to build a new law school then?
What's that?
Never mind.
That was,
being
that
smart.
was
Just being smart. It's been moved in second discussion.
Good question on that. So if you repeal that, what about the 45% of SIPA that goes to major maintenance for schools that's in there? Do you
So
want,
it would do the same thing that the bill. So that rolls that back, that money would then go back up to the general fund. The prison account's gonna be a sub-account. It just takes that bill and puts it right into here. So those school major maintenance funds that are currently allocated in SIPA, just like we do in the SIPA repeal bill, goes back into the
general fund, we would just allocate, and if we need money at
And then
major maintenance, we allocate it out of general
for
fund.
School major maintenance.
Okay.
Please.
That's a proposed amendment. Well,
He doesn't know it's conceptual.
no.
Oh, he does
It's
know.
easy.
I don't know where in the bill that fits. Dave?
Mr. Chairman, I just take it as roll that entire bill, everything it does into this bill.
Correct.
Before 2.
It's 2:05.
I know.
No, we have till Monday.
Further discussion?
Mr.
Please,
Just a
Dave.
question, Mr. Chair. I don't know what the status of that bill is, if it's been amended, but I assume whatever the latest version of that bill is what you want incorporated in.
Whatever the version that came out of the Senate.
That came out of the Senate. Okay.
Okay, discussion? All those in favor of Senator Hicks's motion to incorporate the SIPA repeal bill in here, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Chair votes aye. Okay, so that's in there. Anything else, Senator Hicks?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to put a provision in here. It says if Senate File 121 passes, it controls over any other bill or the budget.
Is that an amendment to your prior motion? No, this is another one.
This is another.
Do we have a second? It's been moved and seconded. Discussion?
That'll just be that'll be probably a section. They'll just put a new section in.
New
It'll
section.
renumber the sections.
Okay. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion passes. Anything else?
Nope.
Any other amendments? Senator Steinmetz? Well, I would move on page 11 that we strike the repealer in section 3 of the step down of the spending policy amounts.
So, and Mr. Chairman, Dave, I think that's WS 94-719. Does it also pick up 10, 11, 10, or is it just limited to 719, the sections in 719?
Mr. Chairman, that would be through 02. And what will happen is a lot of this bill will go away because a lot of the provisions in this bill are nothing but
Conflicting.
changing to a 5%. And so
Yeah,
that,
I'd like to keep the spending policy step down in place to go to 4.75 and 4.5 as is.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
on or against the amendment? I think it defeats the entire purpose of the bill. If that's your intent, let's just vote the bill down.
If I may, we're directing the OPSTA into the corpus is the net of it all. I don't like backing away from that step down in the spending policy. That's why I made the motion. Okay, been moved and seconded. Discussion? Discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Motion fails. We're back on the amendment, substitute amendment X. So would we vote on the amendment and then take roll call on the bill as amended? I think so. All those in favor of the amendment, which is to have substitute X for Senate File 121 adopted as we've amended it, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Same sign. Further discussion? Karen, call the roll.
On Senate File 121, substitute Bill X as amended. Senator Guru. Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz. Senator Perkins.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Kinski.
No.
4 ayes, 1 no.
All right. Who wants to carry this?
I don't know. I'm gonna wear my Kevlar vest when I present this one.
That'll be Monday.
Yep.
We'll pick up House Bill 76 at our next meeting. Karen, if you did, be sure to include that in the notice. Meeting adjourned.